My millionaire dad faked a DNA test to disown me and avoid paying for Yale, so I exposed his $450,000 secret to his entire country club. I was staring down at a plate of $100 wagyu beef, the heavy sterling silver fork physically trembling in my hand, as the man I had called my father for 18 years slid a thick manila envelope across the pristine white linen tablecloth. I reached for it, my heart hammering against my ribs, fully expecting to pull out the crisp cashier's check that would secure my hard-fought seat in Yale's pre-med program. Instead, my fingers pulled out a medical laboratory report stamped with a bright, violent red seal that read, 0% probability of paternity. To understand the absolute psychological warfare of this moment, you have to understand the man sitting across from me. Richard was a prominent venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, a man whose entire existence was predicated on optics, ruthless efficiency, and return on investment. In our family, love wasn't given, it was earned through prestige. My three older siblings, Carter, Sarah, and Pierce, had all secured their places in his heart by getting into Harvard, Princeton, and Columbia, respectively. For each of them, Richard had probably whipped out his platinum fountain pen and written a blank check for full tuition, room, and board. It was the established precedent. It was the family standard. For 4 years, I subjected myself to a completely toxic pressure cooker of academic perfection. I slept 4 hours a night. I maintained a flawless 4.0 grade point average. I scored a perfect 1600 on the SATs. I volunteered at the free clinic downtown until my feet bled, all to ensure I didn't become the sole disappointment of the family. When my acceptance letter from Yale arrived, I felt a level of relief so profound I actually broke down and sobbed in my bedroom. I had made it. I was finally worthy of his respect. Or so I thought. The private dining room at the steakhouse was entirely silent, save for the soft, mocking jazz music piped in through the ceiling speakers. My mother, Eleanor, who had been beaming with pride just 10 seconds earlier, froze. Her diamond earrings caught the chandelier light as she stared at the paper in my trembling hands. Richard, my mother started, her voice shaking. What is this? What kind of sick joke are you playing right now? Richard didn't even look at her. He took a slow, agonizingly deliberate sip of his 2012 Opus 1 Cabernet, savoring the taste before setting the crystal glass down on the table. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the linen cloth, his dark eyes locking onto mine with an emptiness that terrified me. I've spent 18 years raising another man's mistake, he hissed, his voice dropping into a register of pure, unadulterated venom. 18 years feeding you, clothing you, and tolerating your presence in my home under the assumption that you carried my genetics. I've known for 6 months. I ran a discreet swab test through a private contact. I just waited until your little Ivy League dream came true so I could watch the realization physically hit you. I felt the heat rising in my neck and my vision went blurry with rage and overwhelming confusion. The restaurant walls felt like they were rapidly closing in on me. I looked down at the paper, then back up at him. I had his jawline. I had his exact eye color. This was impossible. Dad, I don't understand, I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my dry mouth. Don't call me that, he snapped, pointing a manicured finger directly at my face. The science is absolute. I am not spending another dime on a bastard. Go find your real father and see if he has a spare $300,000 lying around for your tuition. You have until Sunday to pack your bags and get out of my house. Your keys, your car, the credit cards, leave them on the kitchen island. My mother let out a strangled, visceral gasp. Her wineglass slipped from her fingers, plummeting to the marble floor and shattering into 100 pieces, sending dark red liquid splashing across the baseboards like fresh blood. Richard, what are you talking about? She screamed, her face completely draining of all color, making her look like a ghost in the dim lighting. I have never, ever been with another man. You are his father. This is insane. You're lying. Richard finally turned his gaze to her, and the absolute disgust on his face made my stomach churn. Save the theatrics, Eleanor. You know exactly what you did. And if you have a shred of survival instinct left in your body, you will keep your mouth completely shut about this. We are remaining married on paper. We are going to continue hosting the firm's galas, and we are going to smile for the cameras. If you try to initiate a messy, public divorce, the firm's stock will plummet, and I will personally see to it that you walk away with absolutely nothing. He leaves on Sunday. End of discussion. He threw a $100 bill on the table, stood up, adjusted his tailored suit jacket, and walked out of the private dining room without a single backward glance, leaving my mother sobbing hysterically on the floor among the broken glass. The next 48 hours were a blur of absolute, suffocating misery. I went back to the massive, hollow mansion we called home and started throwing my entire life into black garbage bags. The Yale pennant on my wall, which had brought me so much joy just 3 days ago, now looked like a cruel, mocking tombstone. I didn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I just stared at the ceiling, trying to process the fact that my entire identity had been completely erased by a single sheet of paper. But late Saturday night, as I was packing my bathroom toiletries, I stopped and stared at my reflection in the mirror. I looked at the sharp angle of my cheekbones. I looked at the slight, asymmetrical dip in my left eyebrow. I looked at the hazel ring around my pupils. I was staring at a younger clone of Richard. The DNA test said 0%, but my own biology was screaming something entirely different. A dark, incredibly dangerous thought began to form in my mind. What if the man who lied for a living was lying? At 2 a.m., the house was completely silent. I crept out of my bedroom, avoiding the specific floorboards in the hallway I knew would creak. I bypassed the security sensors and slipped directly into the master suite. My mother was heavily medicated, sleeping in the guest wing to avoid Richard. Richard himself was deeply asleep, his rhythmic breathing echoing in the cavernous room. I moved like a ghost into his massive, marble-lined master bathroom. The air smelled strongly of his expensive sandalwood and bergamot cologne. I turned on the dimmest vanity light and opened his top drawer. Sitting perfectly aligned next to his straight razor was his monogrammed, silver-plated hairbrush. I carefully pulled it out and examined the bristles under the light. Entangled in the nylon were exactly 4 thick, silver hairs, complete with the intact follicle roots. I didn't hesitate. I pulled a sterile plastic Ziploc bag from my pocket, used a pair of tweezers to extract the hairs, and sealed the bag. I then plucked 3 of my own hairs from my scalp, dropping them into a secondary bag. I quietly closed the drawer, retreated to my bedroom, and immediately booted up my laptop. I found an independent, fully accredited forensic genetics laboratory in a completely different state. I paid the $600 expedited processing fee using the absolute last of the money I had saved from my summer job at the clinic. I printed the FedEx overnight label, packed the samples, and dropped them in a secure Dropbox at dawn before moving out into a friend's basement. The wait was pure agony. For 12 days, I slept on a lumpy, thrift store couch, ignoring the barrage of text messages from my older siblings who had already been fed Richard's narrative. Carter called me a parasite. Sarah told me I was dead to her. They all completely bought the story that my mother had an affair and that I was a living, breathing betrayal. On the morning of the 13th day, my phone vibrated on the coffee table. It was an email notification from the forensic lab. The subject line read, "Expedited results, case number 88492. My hands were physically shaking as I opened the encrypted PDF attachment. I scrolled past the dense medical jargon, my eyes scanning frantically for the final conclusion at the bottom of the second page. Probability of paternity, 99.998%. I dropped my phone onto the floor. I couldn't breathe. The room started to spin. Richard hadn't just made a mistake. He hadn't just received a faulty test. He had actively, maliciously forged a fake medical document to completely destroy my relationship with my mother, alienate me from my siblings, and throw me out onto the street. He had framed his own wife for infidelity. That's when the real bombshell dropped. Why? Richard was a sociopath when it came to business, but he wasn't irrational. He didn't do anything without a distinct, calculated financial motive. Disowning me didn't make him money. Framing my mother didn't make him money. It was a massive risk to his public reputation if the truth ever got out. So what was he hiding that was so catastrophic it required blowing up his entire family to keep it a secret? I needed access to his financial records, and I knew exactly where he kept them. The following Tuesday, I knew Richard had an in-person board meeting in the city that would last until at least 4 p.m. My mother was at her sister's house, completely paralyzed by depression. I drove to the mansion, parked 2 streets over, and walked through the backwoods. I still knew the override code for the patio door keypad. I slipped inside the silent house and walked directly to Richard's home office. The room was heavy with the scent of old leather and stale cigar smoke. His massive, custom-built mahogany desk dominated the center of the room. I walked around to his heavy leather chair and started pulling drawers. Locked. All of them. But I had lived with this man for 18 years. I knew his arrogance. He believed he was the smartest man in any room, which meant he never accounted for someone outsmarting him. I walked over to the antique globe in the corner of the room, ran my hand along the wooden base, and felt the familiar metallic shape of a tiny brass key taped to the underside. I unlocked the bottom filing drawer of the desk. The drawer was packed with heavily categorized manila folders. I bypassed the firm's operational documents and went straight to the back, pulling out a thick binder labeled Family Educational Trust, Beneficiary Structures. I sat down in his chair and opened the binder. Inside were the Charles Schwab account statements for the massive trust fund he had established years ago. I flipped past Carter's tab. I flipped past Sarah's tab. I got to my tab. According to the original charter, there was supposed to be exactly $450,000 sitting in a high-yield account under my name, maturing on my 18th birthday. I pulled out the most recent statement, dated exactly 3 weeks before the disastrous steakhouse dinner. The account balance was $0. My heart slammed against my ribs. I flipped to the transaction history. Over the course of the last 8 months, someone had been making massive, unauthorized withdrawals. $50,000 here, $100,000 there. The funds were being wired directly to a Cayman Islands holding company, and from there, the paper trail led to a massive, completely unregulated offshore cryptocurrency exchange. I pulled out my phone and quickly searched the dates of the largest withdrawals against the historical charts of the crypto market. The correlation was exact. Richard hadn't just bought crypto. He had been playing with insanely high leverage margin trades on volatile altcoins, and he had been systematically liquidated during a massive market crash. The realization hit me like a physical punch to the gut. Richard didn't disown me because my mother cheated. He disowned me because he was completely, utterly broke in liquid cash. He had gambling debts. He had stolen my entire educational future to cover his catastrophic, off-the-books margin calls. And when it came time to write the check for Yale, he realized he couldn't do it without admitting to his wife, his children, and his board of directors that he had committed severe financial fraud and stolen from his own family trust. So, he created a convenient narrative. A cheating wife, a bastard child, a completely fabricated reason to cut me off financially and save his own skin, throwing my mother's reputation into a woodchipper just to buy himself time. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. A terrifying, surgical calmness washed over my entire body. I pulled out my phone, snapped high-definition photographs of every single page of the bank statements, the wire transfers, and the zeroed-out balance. I put the binder back exactly as I found it, locked the drawer, replaced the key, and walked out of the house. I had the paper trail, but in the world of high-stakes corporate law, paper can be manipulated. I needed a confession. I needed him on tape. 2 days later, I waited for his silver Porsche to pull into the mansion's driveway. I had hidden myself inside the detached, multi-car garage hours earlier. As he parked the car and killed the engine, I stepped out from behind a concrete pillar, my phone securely tucked into my breast pocket, the voice memo app already actively recording. Richard jumped, visibly startled, before his face hardened into a mask of pure fury. "I told you to never step foot on this property again," he snarled, slamming the car door shut. "I will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing, you little parasite." "Call them," I challenged, stepping directly into his path, blocking the door to the house. "Let's get the police involved. In fact, let's get the SEC involved while we're at it. Let's talk about the Cayman Islands holding company, Richard." The color instantly drained from his face. His arrogance evaporated, replaced by the wide-eyed panic of a cornered animal. "I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, taking a slight step backward. "I know about the trust," I said, keeping my voice completely level and cold. "I know you liquidated $450,000. I know you blew it all on off-the-books crypto margin calls. You didn't fake the DNA test because mom cheated. You faked it because you're a pathetic degenerate gambler who stole from his own kid and needed an excuse to avoid paying for Yale." Richard looked wildly around the empty garage, his breathing turning shallow and erratic. He stepped closer to me, his fists clenching at his sides. "You think you're so damn smart," he sneered, his voice dropping to a harsh, desperate whisper. "Yes, the money is gone. It got liquidated in a flash crash. I needed to get rid of you to save the firm's cash reserves. Do you have any idea what would happen if Eleanor found out I blew the trust? She'd divorce me, take half the assets, and the firm's stock would tank overnight. A cheating wife is a much better narrative for the board. It buys me sympathy. It buys me time to rebuild the capital. You're a casualty of business, Jake. Deal with it. Because if you breathe a word of this to anyone, I will bury you so deep in litigation you won't even be able to afford community college." I smiled, a cold, dead smile. "Thanks, Dad," I whispered. I patted my breast pocket, turned around, and walked down the driveway, leaving him standing in the dark garage. I had the weapon. Now, I needed the absolute perfect stage for the execution. Every year, the country club hosted a massive graduation brunch to celebrate the children of the elite members who were heading off to prestigious universities. It was Richard's favorite event of the entire year. It was a place for him to parade his wealth, shake hands with the firm's board of directors, and stroke his own massive ego. He had RSVP'd for a table of 10 months ago. I spent the next 3 days meticulously preparing my trap. I edited the garage audio, enhancing the volume and clarity. I exported the file directly to my phone. Then, I sat down in my friend's basement, set up a ring light, and filmed a 7-minute TikTok video. I titled it, "Unboxing My Dad's Fake DNA Test." In the video, I calmly held up his fake laboratory report, followed immediately by the real, certified forensic results. I then displayed the screenshots of the drained trust account and the offshore wire transfers, explaining exactly how a prominent Silicon Valley VC was stealing from his own children to cover crypto gambling debts. I scheduled the video to go completely public at exactly 11:30 a.m. on Sunday. On Sunday morning, the country club patio was bathed in brilliant, blinding sunshine. The air smelled of expensive mimosas, hollandaise sauce, and fresh-cut grass. Women in pastel sundresses and men in crisp linen polos mingled around the buffet stations. Richard was holding court at the center center table, surrounded by the senior partners of his venture capital firm, sipping champagne and laughing loudly. My mother sat quietly next to him, wearing oversized sunglasses to hide her swollen, tear-stained eyes, looking completely broken. I walked onto the patio wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit. I didn't stop to talk to anyone. I walked straight past the ice sculptures and the oyster bar, heading directly to the small stage where a jazz quartet had just taken a break. The club's main audio-visual system was sitting unattended on a skirted table next to the microphone stand. I pulled an auxiliary cable from my pocket, plugged it directly into my phone, and cranked the master volume slider on the mixing board to the absolute maximum. I picked up the heavy metal microphone and tapped it twice. The sharp, booming sound echoed across the patio, instantly killing the ambient chatter. 200 of the wealthiest, most powerful people in the city turned to look at me. Richard's head snapped around. The champagne flute halfway to his mouth froze. His eyes widened in absolute horror. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice projecting crystal clear over the massive Bose speakers scattered around the patio. "For those who don't know me, my name is Jake. I recently got accepted into Yale's pre-med program. I know my father, Richard, loves to brag about his family's Ivy League pedigree, but unfortunately, Richard recently informed me that he won't be paying my tuition. In fact, he informed me that my mother had a sordid affair, that I am a bastard child, and that I was completely disowned." A collective, massive gasp rippled through the crowd. Women covered their mouths. The board members at Richard's table stared at him in profound shock. My mother pulled her sunglasses down, staring at me with a mixture of terror and utter confusion. Richard vaulted out of his chair, his face turning a dangerous, violently dark shade of purple. "Cut the microphone," he roared, pointing frantically at the club staff. "Get him off the stage right now. He's mentally unwell." "But," I continued, raising my voice to easily overpower his shouting, "I'm a man of science, so I ran my own forensic DNA test, and as it turns out, I am a 99.9% biological match to Richard." The crowd fell dead silent again. You could have heard a pin drop on the concrete. So why would a prominent venture capitalist forge a fake medical document to frame his wife for infidelity and throw his own son onto the street? I asked rhetorically, locking eyes directly with the senior partners of his firm. "Well, I think Richard can explain it much better than I can." I didn't give anyone a chance to react. I pressed play on my phone. The audio from the dark garage blasted across the country club patio, amplified to an absolutely deafening volume. "Yes, the money is gone. It got liquidated in a flash crash. I needed to get rid of you to save the firm's cash reserves. Do you have any idea what would happen if Eleanor found out I blew the trust? She'd divorce me, take half the assets, and the firm's stock would tank overnight. A cheating wife is a much better narrative for the board. It buys me sympathy. It buys me time to rebuild the capital. You're a casualty of business, Jake. Deal with it." The recording finished. The silence that followed was apocalyptic. Richard was frozen in place, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He looked around the patio, desperately searching for a friendly face, but all he found was absolute, unadulterated disgust. My mother slowly stood up from her chair. She didn't look broken anymore. The depression and the fear had instantly vanished, replaced by a cold, terrifying fury. She looked at Richard, her eyes burning with the intensity of 1,000 suns, picked up her glass of mimosa, and threw the entirety of the sticky orange liquid directly into his face. She turned around and walked off the patio without saying a single word. The senior managing partner of Richard's firm, a ruthless, silver-haired man named Harrison, slowly stood up. He didn't yell. He didn't cause a scene. He just looked at Richard, shaking his head in absolute disgust. "Do not come into the office on Monday, Richard," Harrison said, his voice carrying easily in the quiet air. "The board will be convening an emergency meeting this afternoon. We will be auditing every single account you have ever touched." Richard collapsed back into his chair, wiping sticky orange juice from his eyes, his entire life completely unraveling in real time. I unplugged my phone from the soundboard, dropped the microphone onto the stage, and walked out the side gate of the country club. By the time I reached my car, my phone was practically vibrating out of my hand. The TikTok video had gone live exactly when I started speaking. It had already hit 100,000 views. People were tagging the SEC, the local news stations, and the venture capital firm. The fallout was an absolute bloodbath. My mother immediately hired the most ruthless, aggressive family law attorney in the state. She filed for a high-asset, at-fault divorce, citing malicious emotional distress, financial infidelity, and fraud. Because Richard had explicitly framed her to cover his own theft, the judge absolutely eviscerated him in the preliminary hearings, freezing all of his personal assets and granting my mother exclusive access to the remaining estate. The board of directors didn't just fire him, they completely threw him to the wolves. When their internal audit revealed the massive offshore transfers, they contacted federal authorities. Richard is currently under active investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission for massive securities fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. He is facing millions in fines and very likely federal prison time. My older siblings, Carter, Sarah, and Pierce, who had completely abandoned me when they thought I was a bastard, tried to call me crying, begging for forgiveness and saying they were manipulated. I blocked all of their numbers. As for me, I lost my educational trust, but I didn't lose my future. The internet did its thing. I launched a GoFundMe to help cover my legal fees and my Yale tuition. Because the TikTok video had over 10 million views, the campaign hit $100,000 in less than 48 hours. Anonymous donors, angry mothers, and even a few rival venture capitalists chipped in just to spite Richard. I am currently packing my bags, preparing to start my first semester at Yale. I am going to be a doctor. I am going to build a life completely independent of his toxic, transactional world. So, my father faked a DNA test, framed my mother for an affair, and threw me out onto the street just to cover up the fact that he gambled away my entire future on a crypto margin call. In return, I publicly exposed his crimes to his entire professional network, completely destroyed his career, and handed my mother the ammunition to take him for everything he owns. Am I the monster here, or did he get exactly what he deserved?
If you have made it this far and want to see more videos like this, then kindly subscribe and turn on notifications so you may never miss another story like this.